This is round 13 of 15 from the 2014 Rapid Chess Championship. Carlsen has black in this one versus Grandmaster Yu. And we have a Scotch game with d4. And not so common to see this one. Some sideline with queen f6, putting pressure on the knight. Knight b3. And now another queen move, queen to g3, or g6, putting pressure on g2. So it makes life a little bit difficult for the king bishop. But white can always go forward with deploying the queenside pieces, moving the queen and castling queenside. This is, after all, a half-open file. So you could potentially, when you have this half-open d file, you could potentially look forward to this queenside castling move, right? You get the king safe and your rook working in just one move. Okay, first f3, bishop d6. This looks a little bit awkward, not the most common move to be seeing. Placing one of your minor pieces in front of one of your central pawns. It makes life difficult for him, but it has some threats. Looking to smash through on h2 with the follow-up queen g3, forking the king and rook. So that is a threat. Knight f3, or knight to c3. You could capture right away, but you are just kind of getting, well, let me just say it like this. You don't have to capture as black. Black shouldn't, or white shouldn't capture at this point right here. Let's say takes. You simply don't take. You could develop. And if there's a check, you could go here. Yes, he's uncastled, but you know what? This knight is not long off from maybe playing to this square and putting pressure on your c7 square, or even knight to b5. Also, this rook is now on a completely, well, not a completely open file, but a half-open file. So you do win a pawn, but you do also bring to life this major piece on h1. So there is, of course, a drawback with going pawn hunting is what I'm getting at. Development is still going to be key. Knight on g to e7, bishop e3. Now we have that capture. Queen to d2, bishop g3 check. And now b6, queenside castle. You can't deploy this bishop just yet because of the pressure on d7, so bishop takes, queen takes. There's not pressure for just this moment, so now there's time for bishop b7 with queenside castling to follow soon. Bishop d3, looking for some space gaining move with tempo. Queenside castle, here comes that e5 move. The queen is hit. Queen e6, f4, looking for moves like this, maybe to reinforce here first with this idea in mind. The queen is short on squares. These knights and bishop and rook are guarding a lot of squares. The queen needs to find a good home. So in response to f4, we had f6, f5, and queen to f7. You may think, why not capture here, but what could follow, at the very least, if white wants it, is a perpetual attack against the black queen. Queen h2 is pretty much the only move, and you could come back over. Queen back here, you come back over. What if you do something different, like after queen to h2, rook here, queen d6? Well, we could have a move like bishop to this square, attacking the queen, and if queen e5 now, it might be tempting to play this, but that wouldn't be good because you could be capturing on this f5 square. Notice what the difference is between these two bishops' positions, right? The bishop played here to unleash an attack against the queen, but now there's no longer as much pressure on that f5 square. So this is what could happen. If queen here, bishop here, queen e5. After queen to e5, you can first take on this square. And if the knight is there to recapture, now it's certainly going to turn out to be a perpetual attack against the queen. There's just no safe square at this point. So, in other words, what I'm getting at is that Carlsen sees this idea of a perpetual attack against the queen and does not take on the e5 square. Instead, he drops back to f7. Pawn takes, queen takes. The knight centralizes himself. The queen comes all the way back to avoid any entry into the black position with tempo. Knight g5 would be doing that if the queen played to f7. So we didn't have that. It's instead rook on h to f1, knight to e5, and this is where we now start to see things, or I should say, now is where we start to see the smoke clear a bit. We have a knight for bishop exchange. We have now some really good coordination on the black side. One less minor piece around. This queen has an easier time freeing herself. So now just slow improving moves at this point. Queen e7. All the pieces are pretty much working at this point. Queen f7. h6, when you could afford a move like this, a slow move just to watch over a square, a knight hop. Things are looking pretty good. The idea behind this is to make sure that the knight won't be able to post up on e6. Black wants to play this d6 move, so it's important to first cover the g5 square so the knight isn't getting into e6. So anyhow, it's h6 first, g4, king to b8, all consolidating moves that we've just been seeing. Both sets of rooks are not off the board just yet, just one. Wanting to keep some material on the board. White is down material. Knight to d4, knight takes, queen takes. Rook is improving. The bishop is improving, canceling out the knight essentially. The queen is improving. And the king. Rook to d3. And now it's black all of a sudden who is the one putting pressure on the white position. g4, tying the queen down. The queen is potentially in a pin if this rook comes over here to defend the pawn. There's moves like h5 in the air, or even rook takes on f5, exploiting the pin if the queen is unprotected. So queen to f4, h5, a5, the queens are exchanged, the pawns are exchanged, and we could have rook takes f, rook takes g, but and this black, of course, will still be trying to press for a win, having an extra pawn in the bishop versus knight, but maybe best to keep pawns on both wings of the board since we have this potential advantage, right? Or not the potential advantage, probably just flat out an advantage of bishop versus knight. Let's keep pawns on both sides of the board. Rook e7 does just that. Rook g6 threatens the liquidation of these kingside pawns. Rook f7 interferes with that, and now the bishop is looking to pick him up, so the knight gets in a position to defend him. The king gets into play with this d5, king c6, king c6 to c5 idea. f3 is looking for moves like a3 and b4 to kick the king away, so b5 is a step in the direction of maybe granting the black king access to the d4 square, eliminating this pawn, in other words, after a b4 push. So a3 is there, here comes b4, rook back, putting pressure on this, so you take, the king drops back, he could get active on this square now. The rook for a little bit was there to cut off the king from making use of this square, so now the king could maybe drop back to get into that e5 square. c6, and now here comes the king, king to e5. Rook to e7 is a cool move. What is this doing exactly? Well, now that the king is there to watch over f6, it's another rule reversal here. The king, now that he's there to stop this potential liquidation of the kingside pawns, the rook by being on e7 is allowing for bishop to e8 to attack the rook. Got a little messy right there. The rook move is allowing bishop e8 to attack the rook, and this king is not long off from attacking the knight. So once the king is on this f4 square and putting pressure on the knight, the bishop needs to only go back to e8, and then the rook cannot move and still defend the knight on the g3 square. We'll see that take shape in just a moment. King f4, king to d4, bishop e8, and where do you go with the rook? Kind of stuck, aren't you? Knight check, but this is simply not working out at this point. King takes pawn, rook takes. If you take here, well, that's not going to be good. You recapture, you lose your bishop. That's not going to happen. So what do? You throw in a check. You throw in one more check just to make sure your base is covered, and it is at this point that white resigns. Clearly on the next turn, the knight will be picked right back up. So white resigns in this position, and that's pretty much it for this video. So feel free to click the annotation link at the end of this video for round 14 of this tournament, or check in the video's description for links to the 14 other games.